Hi, everyone, and thank you for coming. I think we'll have people continue to join us as we get started, but I want to go ahead and introduce our program. My name's Lauren Adams Willette. I'm the Folk Arts Survey Coordinator at Arkansas Folk and Traditional Arts. And Arkansas Folk and Traditional Arts is a public folklore program serving the state of Arkansas and housed at the University of Arkansas libraries. We work closely with Mid-America Arts Alliance and the Arkansas Arts Council and the National Endowment for the Arts. We have three mainstay programs. This web series, our Community Scholars Program, and our apprenticeship program. And you can learn more at folklife.uark.edu, and I'll put that in the chat here in just a minute. Today, I am we're winding up the 2023 Folklife Web Series with author Kat Robinson. She is a Little Rock-based travel writer and the host of the Emmy-nominated 2018 documentary Make Room for Pie, A Delicious Slice of the Natural State. She's a committee member for the Arkansas Food Hall of Fame. She's written so many books, and we'll talk about that some more shortly. Her most recent work is the Great Arkansas Pie Book, Recipes for the Natural State's famous dish from our favorite restaurants, bakeries, and home. Robinson travels all across the state, so she's known as a road warrior and often as the traveling pie lady. And I'm so excited to talk to her. She also won the Arkansas Department of Parks and Tourism Henry Award for media support in 2011. There's so many things I could say, but I'll stop there and start asking questions. So thanks so much for being here, Kat.
Thank you so much for having me today.
We're gonna have so much fun because when we've talked and visited, we always have such good conversations. And I really love talking to you because you're just so enthusiastic about what you do, and it's just the fun and the joy that you get kind of just comes off, and it just makes me feel good. So my first question is just, I want to give everybody a little bit of your background and let you talk about that. So how did you become interested in foodways and food history and turn that interest into writing?
I've been pretty much my whole life interested in the things that we eat, usually as a consumer. But whenever I was a young woman, I really got interested in medieval cooking. I was and still am a member of the Society for Creative Anachronism, which is a medieval recreation group that has 75,000 members across the entire globe. And I did lots and lots of research into all sorts of food history through that as a hobby. In 2007, I left my first career as a television and radio news producer. 8 of those years I had spent with THV This Morning here in Little Rock. I'd also spent years at KAIT TV in Jonesboro, KARN News Radio in Little Rock, and a couple of other places. I went all over the place in media, but I was ready to do something on my own. And I jumped out and started a new career as a full-time writer. I started with articles, and what I didn't realize whenever I left television, even though I had a lot of experience, was that I was going to have to start over at the bottom. So I started off with those little magazines that you see after you check out from the grocery store, the free ones. That's where I got started with that, with the Cooperative Extension Service. And in 2008, I was asked to take over the Eat Arkansas column for the Arkansas Times, which was a blog dedicated to food lovers in the state. It made me the very first paid independent food blogger in all of Arkansas, which is crazy now, looking back how far we've come. Really, from the get-go, when I started writing for these different publications, I found out that if I wrote about food, those were the pieces that got shared. I actually had a chef turn to me during an interview and turn a question around to me and said, "What is Arkansas food?" And it became a mission for me. And so I spent years and years and years studying this phenomena that we have. I am 16 years in. I now have in addition to Tie-Dye Travels, my website, which has more than 1,200 articles, I also have I think we figured it up that I've probably got somewhere close to 10,000 articles that I have written out just in the general public between my work for Food Network, Forbes Travel Guide, Serious Eats, and all the other little publications here and there. I have 12 books now, including the Great Arkansas Pie book, my new one, working on book number 13. I have the Make Room for Pie documentary that Larry Foley with the University of Arkansas produced. Remarkable experience, and it led to me creating in 2021 my own first documentary called Arkansas Dairy Bars, Neat Eats and Cool Treats, which I produced, edited, wrote, and did everything except for actually shoot it and write the music for it over the span of 10 weeks. I'm not sure I'm going to have that experience again in that short span of time, but it gave me a chance to go back to my TV roots and do some video work with that. I also have a small occasional program with PBS called Home Cooking with Kat and Friends, and that's well, that's just a small cap of it. But if you had to pin down on me one thing that I do, I have to go and turn to my friend in Foodways, the very well-known Southern food writer, John T. Edge, who actually gave me this name accidentally, but it kind of stuck. I have for many years participated with different symposia and field trips with the Southern Foodways Alliance out of Oxford, Mississippi. And at one of those, John introduced me to a friend of his as this is Kat Robinson. She preaches the gospel of Arkansas food. And yeah, I guess I sort of do. It became a mission with me over time to not only make a little money and make sure that I could keep the lights on by writing about food in Arkansas, but documenting it. Review for a mom and pop restaurant could mean the end. And I didn't want to do that because I firmly believe that all boats rise with the tide. And if I can get more people to our local restaurants, then I'm helping local economies, and they in turn will help support the efforts that I do and that others do. Uh, but I also had an opportunity to start reaching back and finding out, hey, what is it that makes Arkansas food? What is Arkansas food? What makes our foodways tick? It's it sometimes means that I don't spend as much time in restaurants as I used to, but I'm more likely to find me on a farm or talking with farmers or producers or wandering around a factory floor, seeing how a different type of spice blend is created, or visiting a brewery, a distillery, which we have so many more of now in Arkansas than we ever did before. It means that I'm on the road a lot. I say sometimes, yes, I visit every one of Arkansas 75 counties, but to be more specific, at this point in time, and it's very common, I've spent time in every one of 75 counties in Arkansas in the past 6 months. I feel it's important for me to be out there and have my ear to the ground, listening to what people are saying about food, watching the trends that are happening, at the same time listening to the stories that people tell about food in their own homes and what they make and what their grandparents make, so that I can create an overall picture of what it is that we eat here in Arkansas. I've been very fortunate along the way to have some support from the University of Arkansas, not in the ways that other people might consider support. Rather than financial support, it's been in the manner of, hey, we've got extra copies of these cookbooks because I'm building a library of Arkansas church and community cookbooks. Or, hey, we've got this great resource. Have you checked this out? And the University of Arkansas's collection is just extraordinary. It is a wonderful research for food lovers like myself. So it's a good place to be in. It's a neat place to be in. And I'm always trying to find new ways to tell the story of Arkansas food.
Yeah. Okay. So that was awesome. Thank you. I want to share what your website looks like and some of the
Sure,
books as I continue to ask questions.
sure.
So this is Kat's website, which is linked in the chat if anybody wants to open that. And then also Tawny Press, where you can purchase the books, and here they all are.
Mhm.
So You talked a lot about what do we eat in Arkansas? What is Arkansas food? Can you tell me, like maybe the elevator pitch for what is Arkansas food?
Okay. And it's a broad subject. And I can say that with some authority because several years ago, I decided to write a book that was supposed to be for elementary school children. It was going to be a primer. A is for apples, B is for barbecue, C is for cheese dip. And what I ended up coming down to at that point in time was 300 entries, which is in Arkansas Food, the A to Z of Eating in the Natural State, which was my fifth book. Um, but it's more than that. Arkansas is blessed for many different reasons. Some of the reasons may seem a little unusual. For instance, we have a cuisine that was very protected over time because of our relationship to other states in the nation and our geography. For people to go across the Mississippi River back before you get to the Louisiana Purchase, uh, you had indigenous people, you have some explorers. Then you had what we would consider the backwoods era of Arkansas. You had this great marshy forested area that kept a lot of people from coming across the river into the center part of Arkansas. So Arkansas food history, past the indigenous folks that we know and we love today, really doesn't include much with a few exceptions. We have some records from Arkansas Post. We have the Parkin Archaeological State Park has fantastic information about French explorers and dinners that were held there between Europeans and the Native Americans that were there. But the real Arkansas food story starts in the 18th century, the 19th century, the 20th century. It starts with indigenous foods and things like pecans and gourds and wild game. And as time goes on, things are layered in. For instance, one of the big things I'm researching right now is our history of barbecue, which in the Delta is almost all pork derived because you had the tenant farmers that came in after the Civil War that were just trying to make enough to survive through the next year, but they had to, of course, share their proceeds with the property owner. So they would farm every single inch of their lands all the way up to the back door. Well, you can't raise cattle in a situation like that. And chicken was for eggs. So you had a pig. You had a pig and a poke, might let him out loose whenever the ground is broken up after harvest. But you have pork barbecue. You've got beef barbecue that holds on in the western portion of the United States because of all things the leather trade, because there was a lot of cattle ranching that was happening in the western portion of the state. It would come here to be processed and then put on a steamboat, sent downriver. What do you do with the meat? Well, we would barbecue the meat. We would smoke the meat. So you've got pork, you've got beef. You have a lot of chicken, especially these days because of Tyson. But our wild game is extraordinary. I mean, whether it's the ducks of the Delta or the deer in lower Arkansas or squirrel, coon, rabbit, possum, yes, even possum. These were all meat sources that we had. We had lots of proteins. We had nuts. In addition to pecan, we have any sort of nut that you can imagine that can be grown here. Like today, peanuts are a big thing in Northeast Arkansas. Walnut trees are all over the state. So you've got great protein sources. At the same time, we're a really unique state because if you cut off all our borders and you had to survive on what was grown here, you do just fine. Everybody knows about rice because we grow more rice in Arkansas that's grown in the entire rest of the United States. A lot of our rice never it gets eaten outside of Arkansas instead of inside of Arkansas. You have this bountiful land of produce, including our tomato, which is both our our state fruit and vegetable, which I find crazy, out of Warren, Arkansas, where there used to be 80 farms that produced it. We have a fantastic apple industry out of the 19th century. Pardon me just a moment. You got all sorts of crops that were grown at home. Subsistence farming really is a thing still for some families, but up until the 1950s, almost every rural family had its own farm plots where you had your beans and your corn and your peas and all of the things that you would want. We would gather garlic wild. We would shake apple trees in the fall. We are able to eat all these things because they're here and because they're fresh. Thing is, though, outside the state of Arkansas, if you were to mention Arkansas cuisine, usually comes down to what people have read in magazines. And that's whenever you come down to the triumvirate of Arkansas fun foods, which is cheese dip, fried pickles, and chocolate gravy. And all of these things, while there are some connections to the natural state, are also those sort of things that people look at as being fun foods. They're not things that you subsist upon. They did get us recognition. You can find fried pickles in any pub in the United States, any bar, a lot of our restaurants and stuff. And they all originated from Atkins, Arkansas, where Burnell Austin one day, running the Dutchess Drive-In across from the pickle factory, decided, hey, what if I fried these? Would this get people to come to my restaurant rather than the one down the road? Or cheese dip, the Donnelly family in Hot Springs having people over to their house after a visit to Mexico where they brought back these spices and they made a roux with flour and butter, and then they put cheese in it and they made cheese dip, and they sold it initially in 1943 from their restaurant, Mexico Chiquito in Protho Junction. And now we get in a fight with Texas every couple of years because they claim that they made it, but it's totally ours. And it would make or break a restaurant in Central Arkansas for more than 2 decades there, from the late 90s up until about 2010. If you had a good restaurant and it wasn't a very particular type of restaurant, the quality of your cheese dip really would make or break you. And then there was chocolate gravy, which we didn't create. I mean, if you want to get technical, it started with the mole sauces that you had in Spain, and then in Appalachia. Kentucky, of all places, may have created the first chocolate gravy, but somehow or another, we hooked into it, and people look at us and go, hey, well, that sounds like an Arkansas thing. There's so much. I've just barely scratched the surface. When you talk about fish, whenever you talk about catfish and brim and crappie, and it is pronounced crappie here, and other game fish that you can get on our lakes, it is so extraordinarily good. And you can fish almost any time of the year. I mean, you can fish anytime. You may not catch fish, say, whenever it's 17 degrees outside, but good luck if you can. There's so much. And it's wonderful. We're this crossroads, whether it's with our crossroads of barbecue when we're in between Memphis and Texas and Kansas City, and we bring the best there is to the table, or it's a farm fresh dinner where you have cornbread that's made from corn that's grown here and milled here and then served up with sorghum molasses that's pressed here and butter that's churned here. I mean, there's so much that we have to offer. It's not Southern food. It's not Midwestern food. It's not Appalachian food. It's something completely unique to our state. And there's 6 different regions of it. I could talk to you about that forever, but I know Lauren's got some more questions for me.
I do. So, I want to pay a little bit of attention to the book, and we've got your Tawny Press website in the chat if anybody wants to be looking at that or purchase it. So you've got the Great Arkansas Pie book. So what can readers expect from this book, and how did you go about writing it?
So this is actually my 3rd book about pie, but it's the first pie cookbook. See, my very first book was 2012's Arkansas Pie, Delicious Slice of the Natural State. I was contacted by an editor who found me by searching on Google. He put in the words Arkansas food. And because I had spent all that time writing all those different articles for different publications, I came up in every single listing in the first 3 pages. So he contacts me and he says, hey, I'm looking for an author. Can you write a book on food in Arkansas? And I'm like, I'd love to. I mean, it was always my dream to become an author, although I thought I'd write the great American novel, but I'll take what I can get. I sent him 4 proposals. He comes back and says, which book can you write in a month? And because I'd written a cover story for the Arkansas Times on pie, and one for Serious Eats and one for Food Network, I'm like, I guess it's going to be on pie. And so I managed in the course of August of 2012 to put together this book. It was a book of essays. And while it did talk about a lot of places where you could find pie, that's what it was about. Whenever we started talking to Arkansas PBS about doing a documentary, they wanted to do a documentary about the crazy stuff I do. And honestly, I'm not that interesting a person, but the people that I talk to are. And I wanted to actually get back out there and share stuff. So we went with Make Room for Pie, and that was fabulous. We filmed it over the course of several weeks in the summer and fall of 2017. But when it came time to prepare to get the show together and have the premiums for Arkansas PBS, we found that the book had been taken out of print. Hence, the day after Christmas, I hit the road and start traveling to every place I can think of in the state of Arkansas that has pie, visiting up to 22 different pie restaurants in a day to manage to crank out somehow or another in March of 2018 another slice of Arkansas pie, delicious. It's not a delicious slice. It's another slice of Arkansas pie, a guide to the best restaurants, bakeries, truck stops, and food trucks for delectable bites in the natural state. That is actually the full title because I had never registered with the Library of Congress before and didn't realize there was a subtitle line. I managed to get that out. It has 475 different places to find pie in Arkansas. And for years, people have called me the pie lady, and they tell me they love the guide, they love the book of essays, but what they wanted was recipes. And I've been collecting recipes for years. I mean, with those 500 Arkansas church and community cookbooks, I have a vast repository there, but I'd also collect them from restaurants, both the ones that are still around, the ones that are defunct, old family recipes, anywhere I could find them. So when it came time to sit down and write this 12th book, I decided to take my time with it. And I reached out to my friends in the restaurant business and asked if they wanted to share recipes. And I reached out to home cooks that were my friends and picked up some from them. And then I took a whole lot of cookbooks with me to the writers' colony at Dairy Hollow up in Eureka Springs, where the first 2 weeks I was up there, I made 50 different pies that are in the book. And the second 2 week jaunt, I did another 45. So when you see this book, it's not a book that I wrote. It's a book I wrote, I photographed, I made the pies, I tried the pies. I did everything for this book except for actually physically print the book, because that's kind of completist that I am. Inside is 248 different recipes for pie and pie crust because, in particular with pie crust, not all of us like to just have a nice butter crust. Some people might want vegetable shortening or want to know how to make a pie crust out of lard or schmaltz, chicken fat, or have a vegan version or a gluten-free version. I wanted to include not just the pies that people always think about, apple, chocolate, possum, which possum pie is an Arkansas delight that includes things like it's got a chocolate custard layer and a cream cheese layer and a whipped cream layer and pecans on the top. But I wanted to dig deeper. So I went and I did a whole ton of research on pies. There's a whole section on savory pies, which savory pies were the way that we would actually preserve our leftovers back in the day. You would have a dinner or supper, depending on which meal it happened to be, where in the early afternoon, that was your main meal of the day. Well, what do you do with leftovers if there's leftovers? Well, you would take them, you'd wrap in a pie crust and stick them in the embers of your dying fire, and there's the next meal. Whether it's something that's eaten in the home or it's picked up and taken with you to go out on the farm or to work or something. This is something we're documenting to doing back to the 18th century. There's recipes in here, for instance, for an 1829 lemon pie, which you take a lemon and you cut it up and you put it in sugar. And when I say the whole lemon, you put in everything but the seeds. I mean, the rinds, the white, the juice, everything goes in that pie. And it's the very first pie we talk about in the book. We talk about things like the crazy pies that became part of our Arkansas road food culture, like the 1986 famous pie from the Arkansas Sesquicentennial, the Cliff House Inn famous Company's Coming pie, which has a meringue and saltine crust. No other pie like it anywhere. It's filled with this pineapple cream mixture in it, and it's so sweet it makes my teeth hurt, but it is wonderful and it's memorable, and it's those kind of pies that just stick with you. I talk about things in here like everything from basic apple and pecan and meringue pies to the crazy name pies like the dog ticket pie or the Joy Choy pie. I tell you what a funeral pie is. Talk about the history of vinegar pie. And I was able to find these great bits of history to include too. Like I was very blessed to be given several of Alma French's pies. Now, Alma was the cook at Ed and Alma's, which became Ed and Kay's, which became very, very well known for its mile-high pies. I have the recipe for several of her meringue pies, as well as the PCP, the pineapple coconut pecan pie that she was well known for. I was also able to pick up a few pies from current restaurants, including People Magazine's best pie in the state of Arkansas, which is the Arkansas possum pie as interpreted by Chef Rob Nelson of Tuscan Trotter in Bentonville. And then there's great gluten-free pies, like you've got to try the cannoli pie that is created at Dogwood Hills Guest Farm by Ruthie Pepler. The full recipes are in the book. I wanted a book that anybody could pick up and create a pie from. Now, mind you, there are some very complicated pie recipes in here, including a really amazing pecan pie recipe from Matt McClure, who used to be the executive chef at the Hive at 21C in Bentonville. 7 times James Beard nominated chef. And it's a very complex pie. But then you can also go and see what an alligator pie is, which was a recipe from a 3rd grader that's also in the book. It's meant for everybody, because when you talk about Arkansas food, you talk about the wide span of food that's on our tables, that is in our restaurants, that's in our history, the common denominator is pie. And I keep finding myself coming back to the subject again and again.
Yeah, no, that's great. I like that you brought in the history in your answer there, because I think that's an important part. So I wonder how do you think that the act of cooking intersects with Arkansas eateries? So where do those two come together?
I wasn't expecting that question. Think about this here. So you have to go back to a lot of our historic eateries. And the first one that comes to mind was back in the 1930s. There was a place up in Eureka Springs that was this woman's house. This was back in the age of car camps. This is whenever tourist camps were popular. You had people that were doing the first of what we call our road tourism. They got a vehicle and they're going to pack up the family, they're going to go. This was at a time before our restaurant culture developed. So they would have cans of something, or they might pick up something at a roadside stand, or they might get food from a farmer somewhere along the way. At night, they would stop at these roadside camps and they would sleep under their car. And whatever they managed to cook was whatever fire they had figured out, or, they just eat something out of a can. There was a woman by the name of Myrtie Mae Bennett. And Myrtie Mae figured this out. Hey, I can actually support myself off of this. She had a house next to a tourist camp in Eureka Springs. And she put a sign up on a tree out front of her house. And it said, chicken dinners. People would come to her door and they'd say, hey, I'd like a chicken dinner. She'd let them sit in her living room while she went out back, dispatched a chicken, plucked it, dismembered it, got it in the pan, and served it on the table in about an hour. That was fast food back then. Myrtie Mae was one of our first restaurant ideals as far as Arkansas restaurants go. She took something that was very useful at the time. She had chickens in the yard that she didn't have to worry about doing a whole lot with. They provided her with eggs and they provided her with a meat source. She had side items. She made a cornbread. She'd have mashed potatoes. She'd have corn or peas or whatever was there, but she made do from what she had. Restaurants figured this out really quickly. So there is this nice overlap between restaurants serving what we ate and what we ate in our homes and what we ate in the restaurant. You also see this in places like the Hole in the Wall Cafe, which may not sound familiar to you until you find out its more modern name. There was a lovely family down in Marianna, Arkansas, that ran this restaurant out of the back of their house, and they served pork barbecue. They used to serve it with all sorts of sides and stuff. Generation after generation did this. This was a Black family right after the Civil War that was making a living serving food. That restaurant, after several iterations, ended up taking that family name. And today, Mr. Harold Jones will serve you pork sandwich with or without slaw or by the pound. And that's all, unless you want a bag of chips or a Coke can out of the fridge. That's all he serves. And yet, Jones Barbecue Diner is the very first restaurant to actually receive a James Beard America's Classic Award. Our acts of feeding people from our kitchens, from our living rooms, from our porches, ended up becoming Arkansas's unique blend of restaurant culture, but it grew from there. I mean, we aren't an island. We do have places outside of our borders. Some of our more famous restaurants, especially some of those that hang on, are because of our road culture. In the 1940s, you had lots of people that were coming back and forth, first to go across the state to Fort Chaffee whenever we were dealing with wartime situation, and lots of soldiers came out of Fort Chaffee, including one very famous gentleman who later on would become synonymous as far as Arkansas food goes with eating Eastern Arkansas. That young man actually showed up at Fort Chaffee to enlist, even though he was a famous rock star, being Elvis Presley. Elvis, on his way to going to Fort Chaffee, stopped in Russellville, Arkansas for a meal at a restaurant. Am I still with you? It just all froze up on me. At this restaurant that was a prefab restaurant created by a Fort Smith businessman for a guy named Woody Mays, who had a motel there along the main stretch of US Highway 64 in Russellville. The guy's name was William Stell, and he wanted to create a new restaurant idea based on the Dreamliner, which the Streamliner, which was a restaurant that was basically a railroad cart that you put into place. Except for he wanted something bigger than that. So he created this first one in Fort Smith and the second one in Russellville that opened on April 4th of 1947, known as the Old South. The Old South restaurant is still in operation today. Despite a fire earlier this year, they've reopened. But the Old South is where you used to be able to get Kansas City steaks and breakfast any time of the day, 24 hours a day. For more than 50 years, it ran every single hour. Didn't matter the holiday or anything, with the exception of the very occasional power outage in the city of Russellville. These foods travel along. The Old South got saved because of several different reasons. Not this year, just because of some very motivated owners who were just fantastic couple of guys. But initially, it managed to stay in the public zeitgeist because it became part of Russellville food culture. And then Elvis stopped by. And about 40 years after Elvis stopped by, it made its way onto the National Register of Historic Places. It's all these crazy food stories. I could go on for ages about this, but restaurant culture and Arkansas food culture are interlinked in these ways. Unfortunately, though, sometimes it works to the negative in a way. I mean, I'm very interested in preserving the foodways that we have, historical foodways. I want people to understand what it was like to eat back 100 and 200 years ago. But we got to a point where our home food culture was really dwindling away, especially in the metropolitan areas like Little Rock, where I'm from. In fact, there was a poll in the late 1990s that came out that discovered that 91% of meals taken in the city of Little Rock were taken outside the home. Nobody was cooking. People were not eating local foods. I'm very fortunate that in 2007, whenever I jumped out into becoming a full-time writer instead of a news producer, I was at the very verge of watching a renaissance happen here. We had all sorts of things that came online. First, with the farmers markets, where we actually brought farmers in, and there's certified farmers markets where local farmers would come in instead of the big food suppliers from across the United States, to restaurants that embrace the idea of a personal relationship with chefs, and to a culture where people started wanting a bit more, not just to be able to get a wide variety of food past the chain operations in their restaurant scene, but how to bring this home and how to make it themselves. In a way, it was sparked by the same reason that our home food has kind of homogenized nationwide. And that's because of things like Bon Appetit magazine. And then, of course, the prevalence of Food Network and the cooking channel. Whenever everybody's watching the same cooking programs, you get this level that everybody's cooking similar things as long as they have supplies available. And then, of course, in the 21st century, you can get supplies from anywhere. You've got the internet. You have massive retailers like Walmart. You have mass distributorships that can get a product grown around the globe to your doorstep in less than a week. So, yeah, it's a blessing, but it's also sometimes it's frustrating. For instance, I'm working on an article right now about Arkansas Thanksgiving foods, and everybody knows, oh, well, whenever you have Thanksgiving, you're going to have cranberries. Well, how long have cranberries been a dish in the state of Arkansas? Not as long as you think. While, yes, we had canned cranberries here in the 1950s, you would have been hard to find them in the 1930s because this was something that was accepted as a Thanksgiving food on a national basis that came to us, particularly the famous Norman Rockwell painting where they're bringing in the turkey, the impossibly huge turkey that I doubt anyone would have been able to carry in like that. We see cranberries there and suddenly they're everywhere. What would we have had? Well, we would have had jams and jellies that we could have augmented the food that we're eating. We'd have fried apples. We might have a blueberry syrup or a sorghum syrup if we really wanted sweet, but we weren't really eating that sweet of a food. Instead, while people talk about stuffing the turkey, no, we didn't do that. We didn't have white bread to tear up and put in the pieces so we can make a stuffing. We were using leftover cornbread to create a dressing that was very similar, of all things, to the corn puddings that indigenous peoples were making here before other cultures came in. So trying to find those little bits and pieces to bring back, to hold on to show this is some of our Arkansas cuisine. This is what makes us unique. It's kind of tough sometimes, but that's what I do.
I did not know that cornbread dressing could be connected to an indigenous foodway. And that is,
Yes.
and I'm gonna, you may not, as you were talking about side dishes with Thanksgiving, I started wondering about relish, which we've not
Yes.
ever talked about at all. But I think of it as an Arkansas foodway.
Uh-huh.
Is there, is that true? I mean, or is that something that is also borrowed or a part of popular
It
culture?
depends. It depends on the type of relish you're talking about. For instance, Arkansas has a very unique catfish feast, and there's a relish involved with that. Most places, whenever you get catfish dinner, it has tartar sauce. Our condiment of choice is a green tomato pickle or green tomato relish that goes with it, and it's very Arkansas peculiar. I've only encountered it a couple places in Mississippi outside of the state of Arkansas. And most people, when I say green tomato relish or green tomato pickle, kind of raise their eyebrow and go, that sounds weird. What is that? But it's something that we have been doing for ages. And it's what we used to do instead of the fried green tomato. See, people look at the fried green tomato and like, oh, it's a Southern dish that's been around forever. No, whenever I was growing up, both sides of my family come from Gurdon in Lower Arkansas, down towards the Hope and Texarkana area. And if you had green tomatoes, say you had accidentally knocked some tomatoes off the vine or something, or you had to pick them before the freeze, we didn't fry them. We put them in tomato relish. It lasted throughout our season. We liked tomato relish. It was nice and it had that nice tang to it. It was a flavor that we were used to. Fried green tomatoes in Arkansas were really not a thing until the book and then the movie, the Franny Flagg book, Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe, came out in the late 1980s. And then suddenly they're everywhere. but that's not what we used to do with them. But relishes of different sorts. I mean, we put up all sorts of things for years and years and years. You could have an onion relish, you could have an orange relish. I mean, and then pickles and jams and butters and preserves, and there's so much. We use these different condiments, and they were very popular to us. While other places like Louisiana, you might get something like a Tabasco sauce or a panola pepper sauce. Well, I mean, common whenever I was a kid and the generations before, we would have a bunch of peppers that we would pick. And you did all sorts of things with peppers, but the main reason that you had peppers in your garden, other than they were pretty and spicy, is you would put them into vinegar and you would just let them sit and you would replenish the vinegar from time to time. That vinegar, when you mixed it with beans or whenever you had it in greens, when you added it to just anything, it was a nice punch of flavor. You still see that sometimes on the tables places. If you've ever seen trappies in a jar, which will have like 4 or 5 peppers in the jar in a clear liquid, that's the whole idea of it. Our condiments used to be so much different. Apple butter used to not be so sweet. We didn't do marmalade per se because oranges are not indigenous here, but you would have plums in all sorts of different portions of seasons. You would have blackberries, you would have strawberries, you had all sorts of fruits to make these jams and jellies and syrups with. And you'd have honey. Of course, honey is something that we've always seemed to have had. And you would have molasses, one of those, the sorghum molasses that had been pressed at your. I mean, I could go on forever this. I just realized I've probably gone way off this. You asked about relishes, but we ate different. I'm still learning. I'm still learning every day. I was going through Thanksgiving menus that I could find for restaurants. And before, say, about 1960, the only restaurant menus I can find specifically for Thanksgiving are usually around military bases. But you can't use those because they were homogenized across the service. So whenever you see oyster stuffing on a menu instead of a cornbread dressing, it kind of makes the brain go, what's going on here? Of course, you could also use the same thing to say, hey, what's going on here? Why do we have Italian spaghetti in the Ozarks? And that's all a matter of travelers. But why did you suddenly see it pop up in, say, Hot Springs? Well, you have people that move. You've got people that are in the services. They go out, they try something, they come back. We're a crossroads. Everywhere's a crossroads today. Trying to find those threads and pick them up and document them where they are right now is essential. It's one of the reasons why whenever I'm collecting these cookbooks from over time, I stop at the year 2000, because once you get far into the internet age, there's a real homogenization of of recipes across cookbooks, because whenever somebody sees a recipe on the internet, that's the one that becomes their family favorite. And that's the one that they end up submitting whenever their high school or their church is trying to get together a fundraising cookbook. And it's trying to catch those threads while I can. That's why it's important for me to try to collect and document this. I'm hoping eventually to have the entire collection digitized and stored somewhere so anybody can go back and say, look for a recipe from 1963 from Whitehall or from 1912 from Piggott or something like that, and see the regional differences and see how far we've come.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, I would you rather talk a little bit more about upcoming holidays or barbecue? Because we have 10 to 15 minutes left, and I don't think we'll be able to fit both. So I want to let you decide.
I touched a little bit on barbecue already with some of the differences. My next book, if all goes well, will be a book on barbecue. Taking the long road with it, and I'm working on it with my partner, Grav Weldon. Starting in January, we'll actually be doing on-site visits and interviews different places. But the past 6 months, I've actually been delving really hardcore into all the historical references that I can find. And what I find with barbecue is, other than sauces, it's really hard to find anything in a cookbook because barbecue is a cooking method more than it is a recipe. But when it comes down to the holidays, oh, the holidays are something incredibly special to me. And there's actually a recipe in this book that I have made up that I'm actually going to be making up today in advance. And it goes back to my maternal grandparent side of the family. My grandmother on my maternal side, that sounded weird, my mother's mother, uh, she was middle class. My father's mother was very, very poor. Um, but Nana used to make things from what was around the property, as everybody did. And one of the things that were on the property was a very old, very gnarly pear orchard. Now, these were the ugliest pears, the hardest pears I have ever encountered in my life. And I've been looking for a while. That's sort of similar to a Bartlett, but very small and very hard. And they never get soft on their own until they rot. So she saw early on the potential of this pear. And over time, she created a recipe specifically made for this pear. It's a mincemeat. Nana would go out and she would collect the pears that had just fallen, and then she'd shake the trees to get the rest that she could. And she would spend a couple of days chopping pears and boiling them down with raisins, pecans, cinnamon, nutmeg, allspice, and cloves. She'd temper them with some apple cider vinegar and a little bit of salt. She would boil this up in huge pots on the back of the stove. This was the smell that I would recognize that would happen pretty soon after the Thanksgiving holiday, because this was the Christmas pie. But it was more than just Christmas pie. She would make so much and put up in quart jars this mincemeat. She put them on racks behind the washer and dryer, which were at one end of the dining and kitchen area in the old house. And whenever it was time to make a pie, she'd pull one down, she'd throw it into a crush, throw it in the oven, and it was there. It was ready to go. You would know Easter was coming when she'd pull down that last jar. Now, she did give an overall rough recipe to my mother, who was the editor of a cookbook in 1984, Cornerstone Cookery. It was the cookbook of the St. Vincent's Infirmary Employee Council. She was president that year. She spearheaded this effort. And many of my family's recipes are saved in that book, because sometimes it's hard to shake recipes out of people. It's hard to get them. Nana gave this huge recipe to my mom. And of course, this is not something that we're just going to make on the fly. It takes hours and hours, because you have to cook down this mass and get all the liquid out. So it's very thick and very syrupy. I took this recipe with me to the writer's colony and spent days refining it. I had one jar left from my grandmother, one jar of mincemeat I held on to. And I know it's going to sound crazy. I held on to that jar for more than 10 years. I finally got brave enough when I figured I had the recipe. I got brave enough and I opened it. And yeah, even though it was a little tacky, it was still good. And it's real close. Except for I put some orange rind in mine because I like that little flavor. To me, going through the process of making mincemeat pie, that to me is my holiday flavor. It's good for Thanksgiving. It's the flavor of Christmas for me. Whenever I first shared out this mincemeat in public at the Historic Arkansas Museum in Little Rock during its second Friday art night, we did a big pie tasting. And someone came up to me and says, "Wow, this tastes like all the holidays at once." I knew I hit it. I knew I did it right. I like sharing those recipes and I want to share them more. The Great Arkansas Pie Book has a lot of these holiday recipes in it, because when you talk about pie, you are talking about the holidays just as much as you're talking about every day, because cake is for special occasions. Pie, though, you can have a slice of pie, nobody blinks an eye. You sit down, you have a slice of cake at lunch, someone's looking, "So what's a special occasion? Do you need a candle?" It's what we do. Uh, our food traditions around the holidays all depend on where we're at. While, of course, nowadays everybody's about turkey or ham. If I were to go out and visit some of my friends over in Stuttgart, Thanksgiving is ducks, as in you gone out, You got your ducks, you plucked your duck, you roasted your duck, you served it with whatever sauce. I've had some amazing plum sauces out there, by the way. You serve it over rice, and that is part of Thanksgiving. If you go down in lower Arkansas and you're, say, around Crossett or something, you may go to someone's house and they've got deer backstrap on the table. It's all something that comes down with our families, with our history. And while, yeah, sure, you can sit down and you can make cookies and you can make cakes or you can make that stovetop stuffing if that's what your folks want to do. It's it's a holiday thing. Holidays, while we have so many holiday foods, I think the big thing for holidays here and pretty much anywhere isn't so much the food we eat on the table, but the people around it.
Yeah.
If we can get people to come around the table and maybe get them in the kitchen too to experience some personal or family history there, I think it's a win for all of us.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so the last thing I want to say about Christmas, because you talked about pie and stuff, and that was just the most beautiful pie story I think I've ever heard in my whole life.
But ugly pears.
The do you have any, like, what do you see in Arkansas that is like a common side dish? Because you touched on main dishes for holidays too. Like, are we green bean casserole? Are we sweet potato casserole?
Well, while my brother is an aficionado of green bean casserole, I am not. If you were to go back and reach into side dishes, I mean, you're going to get things. There's a dish called green rice. I have a recipe for it in my previous book, Arkansas Cookery. It appears in cookbooks all across the state of Arkansas, and it first starts showing up in the Grand Prairie because in the beginning of the 19th century, that's when we first get rice cultivation in the state of Arkansas. And this particular dish, it just picks up and it's everywhere. I think having a rice dish is good and it's important. I I like sweet potato casserole, which is funny because neither my child nor my partner like it. And it's got to be on the table for me. But family wide, it is dressing. And when it's dressing, it's my mom's dressing. Now, my mom does not make a whole lot of food, but she has to make the dressing each year. It took me 3 years of following after her to finally come up with a recipe. And it's actually in a different book of mine, A Bite of Arkansas, although I usually share out the recipe. So watch my socials because it'll be out there. It is a cornbread dressing that initially we started making. You bake the cornbread and then you put it back in the cornbread pan, but she figured out how to do it in the crock pot of all things. Hold on just a moment. Can you still see me here?
Yes.
Something popped up in alert. Okay, so she makes this in the crock pot. What makes her cornbread dressing different from what I taste commercially is she puts pecans in it, which gives it that nutty flavor, lots of sage, and grits. And I know that sounds crazy, but the corn grits that have been cooked, added to the cornbread, give it this fantastic consistency. It is the only time each year that I will eat this dish, and I will eat it until I'm sick because it's that good. There's nothing quite like having that cornbread dressing and a slice of turkey on a soft roll after the fact. So you get both, all sorts of starch in there. That flavor to me, that's what I want out of Thanksgiving. I don't want to stuff myself silly on all the food. I want to come in that evening after we've put everything up and I want to slide that pan of turkey that I've packed down into the dressing to keep it juicy. I want to have a bite of that before I go to bed, and it makes me so very, very happy.
Yeah, well, dressing also makes me very happy. So we definitely are in good company on that. I love dressing so much. It tends to be Thanksgiving and Easter in my family when we eat cornbread dressing.
Easter. Wow. I would never think of Easter, but I could see it.
It's just because we love it so much, and it has to be a special occasion for you to make dressing, because my mom was talking about it earlier this week. It's a real act of love to make dressing for the family. It's a lot
It
of,
takes hours.
yeah.
People don't realize it is a 2 or 3 step process because before you can even start, you have to make your cornbread and you have to let it cool. And the things that you put into it, you have to do all the prep work. And then in my opinion, to make a dressing work, it needs time for everything to amalgamate so that the cornbread takes up the liquid that's within the mix there, and the flavors all bud out. So this is not something that you can put together 15 minutes or do in the microwave. It does take love. And it's really cool to hear that's part of your Easter tradition too.
Yeah. You can come over sometime and try it.
Right.
Yeah, you just let me know when you're toward Melbourne and we'll figure it out. Because they'd all love you for sure. So I want to open it up to any questions from our audience members. And you're welcome to unmute and speak with us, or you can type your questions in the chat and I can read them out loud.
Don't all start at once. While we're waiting, one of the relishes that are just an ancient relish as far as my family goes is chow chow. I don't know if that's something that's part of your family history or not. And I've got a recipe for it in Bite of Arkansas. And chow chow starts off with cabbage. You're basically fermenting cabbage. You could look at it as an Americanized version of kimchi. We don't let it age quite as long, but it's got many of the same things. And chow chow, other than the cabbage and the vinegar, can be anything. In my family, it's got peppers in it. I put a little sugar in it. I add turmeric to mine because I like to have a nice burst of yellow color in there. It's not necessary. Condiments make all sorts of difference in what you eat each day.
Yeah, for sure. It doesn't look like we're going to have any questions today. So, and that's okay. We've covered.
It's a bit of an info dump.
And I appreciate your knowledge so much. I feel I learned so much about Arkansas food history today, and I came in with a pretty decent background of knowledge as somebody who's done a lot of research on Arkansas. So thank you so much. It's truly invaluable. I'm feeling so happy and joyful and ready to celebrate the holidays.
I still have a lot to learn, and I'm always got my ears open, because just because I have a food experience is not always the same food experience that somebody else has. I think eating is the one thing that we do with all of our senses, and it's the one thing that all of us do, right? It's more important for us to break bread together than particularly exactly what is in that bread. So if it promotes a sense of community, wow, we've done something amazing.
Thank you so much. What a beautiful note to end on. Thank you so much for your time, your energy,
Thank you.
knowledge, and we'll talk soon. Bye,
All
everyone.
right.